Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I can't believe we're in the last few days of 2023. It is crazy how fast this year has gone. If you celebrate Christmas, I hope you had a wonderful holiday. We did. We had a great weekend on Friday. We have a friend whose birthday is on Christmas Eve, but his wife threw him a surprise party on Friday the 22nd, so we went to that and got to see them. We haven't seen them in forever, and we got to see some other friends who we also haven't seen in forever. And that was really a great way to spend our Friday night. We had some yummy tapas, and then here Christmas Eve is more celebrated than Christmas Day, so we got to do a traditional Portuguese Christmas Eve with a family, with some friends of ours. One of our good friends invited us to his uncle's family's place for Christmas Eve dinner. There were 22 of us in this tiny little space with a big long table, and it was wonderful. So they have a big meal, and they sit around and they eat and talk and laugh and have fun, and then at midnight, everyone opens presents. And my husband wasn't feeling well, so we didn't stay until midnight, but it was so much fun and so wonderful to be with family on Christmas Eve, even if it wasn't our families specifically, but they're so nice and they were all so welcoming. And I spoke my very bad Portuguese to the best of my ability, and they were all very kind about including us and speaking English. Our friend's girlfriend was also there. She was meeting the family for the first time. She is from Poland, so they spoke English with her as well, and so it's always nice when we are included in that way. But then it was really fun for me to just sit and listen to the family speaking Portuguese to each other as I tried to, pick out as many words as I could and figure out context and all of that stuff. So that was fun. And then Christmas Day was just me and the hubby. We stayed home with the pups and watched movies and had a quiet, relaxing day. We talked to our families. I got to video call my family. Everyone was there but me and my husband, and then my oldest niece and her husband. So it's always bittersweet when I get to see them and see them all at my mom's house doing their Christmas thing. It's wonderful, and at the same time, I really wish I could teleport so that I could have been there as well, but hopefully next year. And my oldest niece and her husband were with his family. They are actually expecting their first baby in February. I'm going to be a great auntie. I'm very excited about that. So they were not traveling, but so everyone but the two of us. Her name is actually also Sarah, just spelled differently. She is not named after me, but we are both Sarah. Again, just spelled differently, and my mother used to call us Sarah Squared. And I got my terrible nickname from her because when she started learning to talk, it just didn't make sense to her that we were both Sarah. She didn't like it, and so my mom started calling me Auntie Sari to kind of differentiate. She was okay with Sari as opposed to Sarah, but she couldn't say it, so it always kept coming out scary. There is an entire generation of children, my nieces and their friends, who still call me Auntie Scary. And then when my brother's youngest was born, she couldn't say the SK sound, and so she started calling me Auntie Gary, and I had to draw the line. I was like, it's bad enough to be Auntie Scary. I'm not going to be Auntie Gary also. Anyway, that was random. And we were talking about Christmas, so I hope yours was wonderful, again, if you celebrate. And now we're in that sort of weird liminal space between Christmas and New Year's where if you're working, it's always weird to go in and then have more time off. And if you're not working, that's lovely, but also kind of a strange spot. But anyway, hopefully if you're not working, you're reading lots and lots of books. And if you are, tell me what they are. I would love to hear about them. Speaking of books, of course, we are here to talk about a book and speak with the author who wrote that book. My guest today is MP Woodward. We are talking about his espionage thriller. It is called Dead Drop. Let me go ahead and give you the description of that book. Nuclear negotiations between the United States and Iran have reached a crisis point. The new American administration is determined to move ahead, but there are several stumbling blocks, not the least of which is Lieutenant Colonel Kasem Khalidi, the former Iranian Quds Force intelligence officer the CIA has hidden away in one of its safe houses. As always, John and Meredith Dale are caught in the middle. Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, wants Meredith's help to find a suspected cache of Quds tactical nukes, while John is in a desperate race to keep Kasem one step ahead of an Iranian hit squad. They are pawns in an international chess game, and any player knows you cannot capture the king without sacrificing some pawns. So that is, as I said, Dead Drop by MP Woodward. If you are a fan of espionage thrillers, then you might want to check this out. It is actually the second book. The first one was called Handler. So some of the same characters. I believe John and Meredith are characters in Handler as well. So if you are interested in that, you definitely will want to check these out. Maybe during this time when you have hopefully you have some extra time to read this week. But if not, and you're a fan of these types of books, then you should definitely check them out anyway. Let's go ahead and turn now to the interview with MP Woodward. Again, the book is called Dead Drop.
Hi, MP. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Sarah. Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for being here. We're going to talk about your book. It's called Dead Drop. But before we do that, if you would take a moment just to share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you a bit, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, you bet. My name's Mike Woodward. I write under the title MP Woodward. I got into writing a long time ago, actually, when I was a young naval officer. It was when I first got interested in it and tried my hand at it, tried to learn about it. And then, life gets in the way and you go from being in the Navy to a tech career that lasts 20 years. I ended up for the last 10 years or so at Amazon and worked in the Prime Video team. And that brought me back to stories and content and that sort of thing. And it got me interested in writing again. And so I wrote my first book in 2020 called The Handler. And that came out in 2021. And then Dead Drop came out last year in 2022. And I have another book coming here in this summer.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So the book we're talking about, as you said, is Dead Drop. Can you give an overview of that story?
Yeah, so Dead Drop's an espionage story that's set in the Middle East, and I think somewhat chillingly, it is very much what is going on right now. Even though I wrote the book about a year and a half to 2 years ago, it's about a conflict between Israel and Iran using Hezbollah as a proxy. And the characters are a divorced CIA couple where the woman is very much at headquarters and has a higher level view, and the man is more of a door kicker action level. And they both have something of a relationship with folks in the Mossad as well as folks in the Iranian Quds Force. And so it's about the Iranians, the Israelis, and the Americans as they struggle to prevent Hezbollah from doing something bad in Israel.
It's always amazing to me how, because books obviously take time to write and they take time to be published. And so what's happening in the world might be completely different at the time you're writing a book than at the time that it's actually published. So the fact that we're talking about this right now when lots of things are going on in the world, that not necessarily mirror the book, but there's some similarities. What would you think it's important for people to understand about what's going on currently maybe before they read the book?
Well, I set the book with when I was writing it, the Iran, the famous quote unquote Iran nuclear deal, which was signed by the Obama administration back in 2015 and then undone by the Trump administration, and then was trying to get restarted by the current administration. And the challenge there is that Iran is so much of a backer of the things that are happening in the Middle East. And so what I wanted to tell in the story was, hey, there's political pressure to want to do something with the Iranians that will make the administration look good. Meanwhile, they're doing something very nefarious through Hezbollah. That is something that we see happening on a daily basis. Like as we record this, just yesterday, we were talking, or the newspapers were writing about the Houthis, which are a Yemeni group backed by Iran in the Red Sea, shooting at commercial shipping. That's all Iranian backed. All the intelligence is coming from Iran. Likewise, the tragic incident that happened in Israel with Gaza on October 7th, where Hamas, a terrorist organization, created mayhem in Israel, largely believed to be backed by Iran. And Israel is very nervous about Hezbollah in Lebanon on their northern border, also backed by Iran. And if you read these things, they're all backed by a group within Iran called the Quds Force, which is sort of an independent level equivalent to like kind of like a CIA or KGB, but they take it a little farther and really try to foment revolution around the world. So that's very much what happens in in Dead Drop. I'm somewhat sad to see it playing out in the real world, but I do think Dead Drop can help educate people on some of the forces or some of the things going behind the news today.
Keep that last sentence in mind as we go to our first break. He was just saying stories behind the news today. So as I said, keep that in mind. But let's go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the news and how current events relate to this book, as well as inspiration behind this particular story. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast, dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with author MP Woodward about his book, Dead Drop. Let's return to that conversation.
Yeah, because, we get our news in sound bites often, and so sometimes it's hard to sort through all of that and to know really the complexities and the layers of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, exactly right. And, sure, we all, if you have, we all have busy lives and you have a day job and you, as you said, you're catching something on the radio on your way home or on your phone or whatever. And maybe you even read the paper, but you don't have all day to do it. And when I sat down to write the book, but at that point I was writing full time and under contract. And so the ability to really sift through things and read several books of research and travel to the area and talk to people, et cetera, all of a sudden it becomes very clear to you what's a lot clearer than it did when I was, a working professional. And that's something that I try to do in my writing is bring that authenticity forward.
Sure. Well, and it's sometimes it's easier to read a book that's fiction. You know, it's a little more engaging than maybe sifting through or reading a news story or reading history books and political science books. And so if this can be a jumping off point for people to have a better understanding, obviously this is, you know, it's still fiction, but it might be that jumping off point for people. I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah, I would say that I grew up really hooked on historical fiction, and I always just found it to be a way that made history come alive. So what I endeavor to do in writing current fiction is to certainly entertain first, without a doubt, but to also be authentic to the point that people come away from something and say, "Hey, I learned something there," either about this conflict or some of the technology that these opposing forces use, or the way intelligence agencies work, you know, that type of thing.
Sure, yeah. And you mentioned the deal in the Obama administration, excuse me, that was kind of your jumping off point for the story. Was that your initial inspiration, or what was your impetus to write this particular book?
It was, I had focused in my first book called The Handler. I had focused on an officer in the Quds Force, who ends up defecting at the end of that book. So I wanted to open Dead Drop with, hey, what if we had this officer and the Iranians knew it, and that was something that was interfering with the negotiations. So yeah, the entire issue of Iran and enriching uranium. If you follow this sort of thing, which I do now very closely, what you'll see is that Iran is, you know, they can pretty much enrich that uranium to weapons grade anytime they want to. So I wanted to set, and that's something that the intelligence agencies, when they do that, when they get to weapons grade, when I wanted to set the book at that point, and the intelligence agencies call that breakout. So I wanted to sort of tell the story of what will it look like once the Iranians are quote unquote post breakout, and all the other things that happen in the background, you know, that are not very friendly, like are going on right now, with Israel, but then also the political side of things of, you know, how would we all react to that if all of a sudden Iran had nuclear weapons? And I think that there would become this debate between, you know, being more aggressive, which in Dead Drop I have being the Israeli point of view, and then a strategy I would link to something called, you know, containment, more like the Cold War philosophy, which ends up being the American point of view in the book. So I really wanted to play that out as to how that would look, both at the political level as well as below the surface, where, you know, the Quds Force is off doing bad things.
Yeah, and you mentioned the couple, Meredith and John. Can you talk a little bit more about them, and what about them as characters might resonate with readers?
Yeah, sure. So Meredith is a working woman, single mom, because the couple got divorced, you know, 5-6 years ago. She's sort of mid-career at the CIA, high enough that she has the occasional meeting with the deputy director, but not so high that she's calling the shots. And she chafes at the bureaucracy. She's somebody who likes the action, but she's also ambitious. And she has even though they're divorced, she has something of a symbiotic relationship with her ex-husband, John, who is more of an operator and had been in the special activities division and left the CIA years ago and really just kind of wants to be left alone. But because he has these relationships with the Mossad and the Iranians, and of course with his ex-wife, by hook or crook, he gets dragged back in. So it's a hero structure where the two heroes, Meredith and John, really are often in conflict with each other and present different points of view.
That's a fairly common character, I think, is that one character who just wants to be left alone, and they keep getting sucked back into things that they don't want to be sucked into.
Yeah, it is something of a literary trope, but I think it's a good device, because what I think what we want is we want reluctant heroes, right? We don't want someone
Mhm.
who's bloodthirsty and all they think about is going and do this. It's somebody who has to make a choice and say, oh, do I leave the life I've created for myself because people need me to do this thing and I'm the only one that can get it done? And, I think if you look at most literary heroes, they all kind of start that way.
Right. And it gives the reader the opportunity to get into not only the mindset of the hero, but also into some of the details of the story. If the hero is just in gung ho from the very beginning, you don't get as much background or explanation about the situation. So I think it does serve that purpose.
Yeah, and I think there's this concept you hear screenwriters talk about rootability, and I think by showing more of the character in sort of daily life, and doing regular things and having the same worries that we all do, before getting into some kind of exotic action that we don't all do, that it really helps humanize a character, add depth to them, and make you hope that they can kind of get through this so they can get back to the thing that's really in their heart. And that's very much the case with John.
Mm-hmm. You've touched on this briefly, but there had to have been a lot of research that went into the writing of this story. What were some of the highlights of that research for you?
Oh gosh. Well, certainly. So I was an intelligence officer by trade, so I had something of a background on this. But then to make it more current and to match the story, I traveled throughout the region. I also talked to some Israelis who are ex Mossad, and read just several books on it. And I think as Americans, as we talked about earlier, with most of us pick up the news in sound bites. I think particularly the Israeli, Arab Palestinian conflict, it's almost become so much noise over the last, decades, that I think a lot of us sort of tune it out. And so as I got into the research, there were all these things like, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember when that was in the news. And it all kind of started plugging together and giving me a much better appreciation and a broader mosaic as to how things have unfolded and are unfolding in the region. So yeah, this book took quite a bit of research and going deeper into what's been happening there.
Do you find it challenging ever to take all of the information that you learned through your research and then kind of boil that down to the salient points that you need to include for the story?
Yeah, I do, and I think that that's something I'm working on and trying to get better at as I mature as a fiction writer. There's so much that you could easily lose a reader in the details, and that's simply not necessary to drive a story forward. You just need to provide just enough or just enough context, etc., and make that approachable and have it make sense. So yeah, I do think that's a challenge. I would say that the thing that I found in research, and my subsequent books, I found this too. It's funny when you start to research a particular thing, you start to encounter, you've hit, pretty much all there is on it, or most of what's available popularly, when you start to see that, hey, I'm reading this book and they're referencing this other book that I already read, and that book's referencing this other book that I already read, and they're all sort of like talking about, the same thing. And I found that happened quite often in researching this.
It makes sense, yeah, but it's also kind of probably a good indication that you can move forward.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, I think we've hit pay dirt here.
Yeah, exactly. You've also touched a little bit on this about your own life experiences, but how have those experiences, both as an intelligence officer and maybe even working for Amazon, how do they influence or inform your writing?
Just so much. I mean, I think when I was young, in my 20s, and I really admired good fiction writers, particularly historical fiction, and you try to do it, and you realize you don't have eventually you realize you don't have the life experience maybe to do things to really have characters react to things in the way that you've learned over the years. And so there's a couple ways I'd say that my life experience informs this. One is I wanted people within the intelligence agencies that are portrayed in the book to feel real, and for those intelligence agencies to feel real. So it's not like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe where this guy's just got superpowers and can do everything. I wanted there to be real limitations and to show the sort of the bureaucracies at work within those intelligence agencies. So that was a big part. But I would say that my experience in corporate America and in particular Amazon taught me the importance of storytelling in terms of what to include and what not to include. And in particular, when I got to Amazon, I was close to creators in the Prime Video side of things, and close to consumers of the videos that we were producing. And it showed me like, okay, if you start to think about this more as a product and think about it having a beginning and a middle and an end and being truly, consumed by someone, you sort of start to develop a mental framework for what works and what doesn't. And I started to develop that at Amazon, and that definitely informed my writing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Let's go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, Mike will be talking about characters and character development. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author MP Woodward.
Let's talk a little bit about characters and character development. When you sit down to write and you kind of have that, maybe an outline of the story. I don't know if you're a plotter or a pantser, but you know kind of where you want to go with the story and some of the characters. Do you sit down and really flesh out those characters before you start writing, or do you prefer to kind of let that happen naturally through the process of writing?
Well, I probably about half, at half I have an idea of who they are and what their thoughts are, et cetera. And then as I start to write, it becomes a lot clearer. But I am very much a plotter. I think planning a book beforehand is super important, and knowing what the character arc is, or what the arc is for each of those characters. And that's something that I do very intentionally, is that even if, there's 2 or 3 or 4 on the heroic side and, 3 or 4 on the antagonistic side, I try to give each of those characters an arc to where they're different at the end of the book than they were at the beginning. And that certainly helps form characterization. But then I also found that once your characters are super crisp in your head, and you're halfway through the book, things become a lot easier when you put them in conflict with each other, because they sort of react the way that you that you know they're going to react. You don't have to invent it. It's almost like you're just watching it happen and channeling it.
Yeah, and then sometimes they react in ways you don't quite expect, or at least other authors have said sometimes characters just go off the rails a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it less predictable, because not every, even though somebody's too highly characterized and you can say this is their psychological point of view and this is the way they typically do stuff. I think one of the joys of reading and fiction is that, hey, every now and then, they kind of lose it or whatever. And so playing with those things only makes them, I think, a little more complex and a little more human.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense. What is it about this particular genre that draws you to writing within it?
I quite like the stakes, I guess, of international affairs, and the thing that I wanted to play with is to try to say, yeah, we've all heard of this big conflict around the world, or maybe we haven't heard much, but we can understand it and why that would be important. But then to characterize it and to make it something where there are people behind the scenes. So I like the idea of creating characters and stories that are, the movement below the headline. And I think that gives it sort of two levels. I didn't really want to try to write about, oh, this is here's the president and he's talking to the other president and that kind of thing. I wanted it to be the people down that you would never meet and never hear of, who are way down the food chain, but they're still being affected by those big movements. And in some respects, the things that they're doing are affecting the big movements as well.
Right. Because every person is a piece of that puzzle. And so you of course you need the major players who are affecting that change, but somebody has to carry out that change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then that becomes a lot more, I think, entertaining, because you're seeing like, oh wow, here's this person who's got to do these things. The stakes are huge, et cetera, et cetera. And yet they're still human, right? They're still gonna have a bad temper or miss a detail and screw something up. They're still flawed. And so I like that idea of humans that are really pushing things forward, that have big stakes, instead of the way it's presented to us in the news, that everything's, around talks between secretaries of state and, senior people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it humanizes it a little bit more.
For sure.
Yeah. At the beginning, you said that you have another book coming out this summer that is Shadow State, which is a Jack Ryan Jr. novel. Can you talk a little bit about that and what readers can expect?
Yeah, sure. So Shadow State, as you said, there's within the Tom Clancy series with Penguin Random House. There are two main lines, one, the Jack Ryan Sr. series, and then the Jack Ryan Jr. series. And so Shadow State has Jack Ryan working as he does as a young professional within something called Henley Associates. And the Henley Associates is really a hybrid organization that does both financial stuff as well as executes things by order of the president. So he is in Southeast Asia, and he ends up being caught between a conflict between China and the U.S. And the book is set in Vietnam. And I wanted to contrast what many of us know about Vietnam from, a lot of books and movies and everything else around the Vietnam War. And then put a conflict happening there today, really between China and the U.S. with Vietnam in between, and the stakes being completely different and geopolitics being completely different. But all the fun, jungles and rivers and riverboat scenes and things of that nature.
Right. You have to have all of the action and everything that people expect. You're actually the second author I've talked to in the last few months who has written in this Tom Clancy universe, and my dad loved Tom Clancy. He used to read Tom Clancy all the time. My brother does as well. And so I have this little bit of fangirl geekiness going on in my heart when I talk to you because I think of my dad. So how is it for you as an author to write in this universe in this universe that was created by an author that is very beloved by a lot of readers?
Yeah, well, first off, it's a giant honor, and second off, it was really fun. So I several thoughts on this. First off, I too was a big fan. I remember Hunt for Red October when I was a young Navy midshipman, and then Red Storm Rising, and then all the rest of them, and to come in and pick it up. There's, a couple things. One is you realize you have a major responsibility to be true to the characters and the universe that's been created. And that can feel a little bit intimidating, but as I started doing it, I realized it's actually really fun. And in some ways it's less challenging than creating your own, right? Like, you sort of know who these guys are, you know how they function, you know who you can bring in, et cetera. So that part I liked a lot and got into relatively quickly. There are some nuances, I think, when the characters interact where, my editor be like, well, that they don't really talk to each other that way, those kinds of things. And then hitting on, one of the hallmarks of a good Clancy book is always involving a bit of the techno part and making that accessible and readable and not boring and keeping the action going. Those were all things I had already been working on with my own series. So that fit in pretty well. So anyway, I have quite enjoyed it. I'm into a second one now that is set in Central America and getting ready to travel down there in January. And it's been a lot of fun. I really love it.
Wonderful. So you're working on that second one. Are you working on one of your, I don't want to say your own books but the writing is, just you as opposed to writing in this other universe?
Well, yes, I am, but I tell you the cadence of the Clancy series, it's pretty intense. So there's only so much time in the day. And so I am, about halfway done, with another, but I end up putting it on pause because of the due dates on these Clancy books.
Sure. Makes sense. Any other writings that you would like to highlight during our time together?
No, I try to, one thing that I do is, I maintain a blog at mpwoodward.com where one of the things that I quite enjoy is as I'm doing research for these books, you all of a sudden realize like, hey man, there's something here that people should know about. And I try to tilt my blogs because of my background in global business and international business. I try to tilt it to, hey, here's something that you as a business person might need to know about, geopolitically, and try to show the intersection between those things. Because I spent a lot of my Amazon career, traveling internationally, et cetera, and didn't necessarily think about it a lot. But I think those worlds are becoming more and more intertwined, as we move from the unfettered globalism of the 90s and 2000s to something that looks a little bit more like great power competition today.
I like that because that means you can take that research and utilize it even more so than just as background for a book. You can put it out in a different way.
Yes, exactly. And I also find that for myself, when I'm writing something that is nonfiction as a blog post, it forces you to, it's kind of like when you're in school, right? And when you have to write a paper, well, you better understand it. Otherwise you won't be able to explain it. So it forces me into that added dimension to really understand something. And then that makes the fiction better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And now time for our final break of this episode. When we come back, we'll talk about Mike's advice for aspiring authors. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast. Time to hashtag everything. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media. From Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author MP Woodward.
You've wanted to write for a long time throughout your life. What was the final impetus that said, now's the time I'm going to try to write for publication?
You know what? It was in 2020, a thing happened where Iran accidentally shot down a civilian airliner. I don't know if you remember that, but it was in January of 2020. It happened to be a Ukrainian airliner, not that Ukraine was in the news much then. But the Iranians thought it was an American cruise missile. And so here, this jetliner takes off out of Tehran. It's filled with young Iranian students, most of whom are in college, headed back to Canada. And the the IRGC shoots it down, killing everybody. And, you can watch this happen on YouTube. And I remember I was on my way to a business trip when that happened. And it really struck me that, wow, this was filled with educated, probably more affluent young Iranian students. What if the parents of one of those students was somebody important and really, was all of a sudden now had an axe to grind against the regime. And so that really forced me to think about it and to get back into writing, because I felt like, again, having spent a lot of time with Amazon and storytellers and that kind of thing, all of a sudden I felt like I had a good story to tell. And that was really my impetus to get back into it. And then when that was accepted and published and all that stuff, I was like, okay, yeah, I think I know how to do this, and I've always wanted to, and so I'm gonna pursue it.
Wonderful. From that experience, what advice would you give for somebody who's thinking, yeah, you know what? I've always kind of wanted to write. I'm going to try it.
A couple things. I guess the main thing would be to, when you're writing something, it can always sound good to you, even though it's not good, right? And I think that young writers make that mistake all the time, and then they plow forward, and then they've spent all this time with something, and then they realize eventually that it's not good. And so I really recommend studying the genre that you're trying to write. Like, pick a book that to you struck you and that you want to fit into that genre, and break that sucker down. Really diagram it out. Take a look at each chapter and the way they evolved, and the way the perspectives shifted back and forth between the characters, and the way, various types of scenes work, some that are more expository, yet they don't feel expository because they're being done with dialogue, or the way action is being done. And, there's plenty of details, but there's also a lot of details that are left out, that kind of stuff. Like, just really studying what's out there. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's all available right there. And so I think you have to approach it with a lot of humility and think like, look, how can this is something I admire. How can I create something like that, as opposed to thinking you already know, and this is just a matter of spitting something out of your head? Because it's not. I think it's a lot more technical and intentional than that.
Especially when other people are going to read it, because things often make sense in our own heads that then, you think you've been clear in how you've depicted something or explained something, but it's not always clear to the person reading.
Well, precisely. Absolutely right. And I think that, I certainly did this when you think I'm going to write something and you do, and you get enamored with your own prose and you think it's all, poetic and descriptive and lovely. And then you can realize that like, well, the reader's already moved on. Like they got it. You know what I mean? Like, okay, they're on a beach. You don't have to describe, everything about that beach. You just kind of tell, hey, it smells like suntan lotion and the sun is baking and there's a few umbrellas. The reader's there. They're already populating things in their head. And then you kind of got to quickly move that to, things like dialogue or something happening. And I don't think that someone who's never done this before sort of realizes that. And I don't think, I guess you just, there's so many examples out there to look at and break that down. That's certainly how I started to think about this is thinking about it from a reader's point of view and a storytelling product, as opposed to, hey, this is my art and I'm going to be so gifted and people are just going to love it, right? You have to, I think you have to think about it much more as, let's make a finished product that readers will love and then work backwards from that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. When you take time to read just for you, not necessarily for research or some other project, what are your favorite genres and authors?
Well, it's funny because I had always liked to read, espionage fiction. I always liked John le Carré. We talked about Tom Clancy. I think Mark Cameron has done a particularly good job with carrying the Clancy series forward. But when I'm writing, I tend to not read them because I think it can interfere with your own thought processes a little bit. And so I actually, when I'm writing, I like to read a lot of biographies because I find that a good biography does such a great job of a character study that then I can use later in books. And these people who are super famous and have done big, historic things, you get a chance to break that down and see how human they really were and how it wasn't always obvious to them, et cetera. And I think that's just really helpful in making characters.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned your blog. How about other, website and any social media that you are active on if for people who may want to learn more about you and your books?
Yeah, mpwoodward.com is the website that links to all my socials, but I'm certainly out there on Facebook and X and to a lesser extent, Instagram, but all those can be found at mpwoodward.com.
Perfect. Thank you. Mike, is there anything that we haven't covered that you were hoping to highlight during this time together?
No, Sarah, I think that does it. I really appreciate being on the show.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about Dead Drop and about writing. Thank you so much.
All right, Sarah, take care.
Thank you once again to Mike for joining me for this conversation. As I said at the beginning, if you are a fan of thrillers, especially espionage type thrillers, if you're a fan of Tom Clancy books and that universe, then you definitely want to check out MP Woodward as an author. There are 2 books out, the Tom Clancy book coming out in 2024, and so you've got some things to check out. I definitely like Dead Drop in that it has the male and female character dynamic of this couple who are no longer together. They're divorced, but, you've got all those dynamics playing in there. So you've got a strong female character, you've got a strong male character. They are working together, but still, working through their issues as well. So there is that element of the story. And then, of course, all the layers and complexities of espionage thrillers, and especially with everything that is going on in the world today, might be an interesting way to learn some more, if this is an area of the world and geopolitics that you're interested in, fiction can sometimes be a great entree into learning more about those types of situations. Thank you again for joining me. I hope you will join me for next week's episode when I will be speaking with author Lynn Squire about his book Immortalized to Death. It starts out with the death of Charles Dickens, and was it murder? Was it not murder? We're going to find out when we talk to Lynn about that book. So historical fiction, but Dickens isn't exactly a character because he dies in the first couple of pages, but we're going to explore that from there in the book. So join me for that conversation on the next episode with an interview. Hope you are having a wonderful week. I hope that you had a wonderful holiday weekend. If you celebrated, and as always, if you are a fan of this podcast and would like to help it get out to more listeners such as yourselves, make sure that you are liking, subscribed, etc. on the platform that you're listening on. That's helpful to you because you'll always know when new episodes come out. You'll get a notification, and it's helpful to the podcast because it means that more people will find the podcast and listen to these authors and hopefully find new authors and new books that they love. Also follow the podcast on social media, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Of course, if you have books that you want to share with me, or, reading related information or anything silly, whatever, it doesn't have to be book related. Just find the podcast, find me on social media through the podcast, and tell me what's on your mind. Love to hear from listeners. Enjoy this week, the last week of 2023. Whatever you're doing, I hope it affords you plenty of time to get lost in a good book and maybe reach some of those reading goals you set for 2023. Talk to you next time. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.